So, welcome everybody to the fourth class of our free design program. I'm Matt Friedman, your teacher. And of course, the man who needs no introduction but always gets one, Il Nivlador, is our community defender. If you have any questions in the chat, proceed them with 4 question marks so Nivlador can be sure to catch them. And if you got any feedback, there's an email address right at the top to let us know what you like, what you didn't like, and what you want us to change. If you're joining me here in the video call, you got a question, just raise your hand and I'll be sure to get to you. All right. Jumping into things. So for today's class, we're going to quickly go through some class updates. We're going to have a discussion about player perspective and levels and then enemies. And then we got a couple of homework assignments for you. Jumping in, we are revising our Q&A structure here. We'd like to have a conversational kind of style class here, but we want to focus this up a little bit. So for questions in chat, Nivlador will be recording those down, and then we'll be getting to those at a specific point of the class. And any other questions we don't get to, we'll be addressing at the end of class. So if your question doesn't get picked, don't worry. End of class, we'll get to the rest of them. If you're joining me here in chat, you had a question, you can always raise your hand. I do like this to be a little conversational here, just so it's not just me yammering on. Quick update, FDI Labs will be rolling out in about 3 days. So if you want feedback on your design so you can iterate on and improve them, this will be a resource for you to do just that. That'll be happening through Discord. If you want to join us in Discord, there's information in the student resources document, which is pinned in the chat. FDI Live is happening November 9th in Edmonton. Invites will be going out this week. We're also going to be revising our assignments feedback structure. So you should, within your game design workbook, you will start to see feedback comments from myself and the Paladins in the community to help you structure and direct your overall feedback, or direct your overall design, sorry. All right, so as always, we like to start this class with good news. Did you know that a couple days ago, Storage Hunter Simulator was released? You guys could be playing Storage Hunter Simulator right now, fulfilling all your wildest storage hunting dreams, or you can hang out with me here in class. So like, if you ever had a lot of stuff and thought, where can I put this stuff? But first I want to do that in a game. It's like, it's right there, guys. It's right there. All right. All right.
I must go, sorry.
Yeah, so I know in Nivlador, you're big into storage, man. It was like wrestling or professional storage organization. That's always been the tension. All right. You guys are stuck with me now, because let's get to it. All right, so we're going to jump into level design and enemy design for today's discussion. Level design, think of it as the physical layout of gameplay resources. You can have, of course, a traditional 3-dimensional level. You can have a level as in like a 2D puzzle. You can also have abstractions of a level of like characters playing cards around a card table. The layout and turn order of those characters is a spatial element that can be considered part of your level design, though it is a little more abstract. Enemy design are generally dynamic elements that are testing player skill. So these are little bits of chaos that are injected into your level to keep players on their toes. But first, I want us to talk about brains, the human brain in particular, because everything you do as a designer's got to go through this thing. So brains are all about player perspective, understanding how players are viewing things. Before we can get into effective level or enemy design, we've got to be aware of player perspective. And that's all about knowing what the player's thinking about. What is the player actually trying to do? I know there's the stuff we want them to be doing, the stuff they should be doing, but what are they actually trying to do? You nail that, your designs will be far more effective. You must know that before you can effectively design puzzles. Really, Old designs, old good design is puzzle design. If you're doing an action game or a simulator or a social game, gameplay exists within puzzles. In Call of Duty, there's target acquisition and positioning puzzles and resource management puzzles. Legend of Zelda, loads of puzzles there. Genshin Impact, again, navigation, resource puzzles. Good game design is about puzzle design. Good puzzles are understanding about what the player's thinking about. So, for that, I've got a question for you. What do I want to do? I'm holding the controller. What do I want to do right now? Can you answer me in the chat?
Defeat El Hombo.
Pardon?
Defeat El Hombo.
Yeah, I do want to defeat El Humbo, but that happens in the ring. I can't defeat him with a controller. You know that. Yes, I want to be playing a game. I want to be mashing buttons. I want to be doing something. I want to be playing a game. Right now, what do I want to be doing? This cup has got coffee in it, by the way. What do I want to be doing? I don't want to be holding coffee. I want to be holding a cup, but I want to be holding a cup because I want to be drinking from a cup. Delicious, delicious coffee. Where would we be without it? So, obvious questions, but the reason why we're jumping into this is because you ask yourself, what does the player want to do? What I wanted to do was dictated by the tools that were available to me. I had a cup, I wanted to drink from it. I have a controller, I want to be playing a game. I have a hammer, I want to be building stuff. I'm wearing oven mitts, probably want to be baking. This is how you want to be thinking about your gameplay tools. Your gameplay in general, really. So your gameplay rules and systems are tools for the player. How you present those to the player and the kinds of tools that are available to the player will dictate what the player wants to do. Being aware of that is critical to effective level and enemy design because those are the systems that the player is exclusively viewing the game world through. Think of this as being like a player's vocabulary. It's good designs about communication. These gameplay rules are how the player's going to be trying to, or these gameplay tools, are how the player's going to be trying to communicate with the systems, with your game. Generally, I find that these tools fall into about 3 different broad categories. First one's being movement, how the player positions themselves within the game world. This is generally, running, jumping, sliding, climbing, all that kind of stuff. It's all about, I can't take that dense collection of gameplay tools that is the player character, and I position it within the world via movement. Second one is viewpoint, the information they have available to them. That's generally your camera perspective. Is that first person? Is that third person? Is it top down? Is it something more abstract, like what you would find within a text adventure? That viewpoint is how they are processing the information around them. There's a reason why if I'm doing a game with a lot of platforming in it, I want to be doing that from a third-person perspective. First-person perspective is largely about target acquisition and environmental analysis. Or it's actually not quite environmental analysis. That's part of it, but it's about, there's target acquisition and also, let me think about this, because this is actually a bit of a tricky one. It's a type of environment analysis that is more about what is ahead of me. First-person games are very much about forward progression. Third-person games are more about environmental awareness because I can see more of the environment from that camera perspective. So it's very much more about spatial awareness and exploration. You can do exploration in first person. You can do targeting in third person, but generally across a large number of games, you'll find if the game is focusing on exploration, third person generally is a little more effective. If it's focused on target acquisition and forward progression, you generally want to be going first person. You can break the rules, and that's important, but you also got to respect the rules. Third thing for how with a player's vocabulary is, are there gameplay tools? That's your weapons, your abilities, different inventory items, spells, all that kind of stuff. All these things are various tools the player can use to interact with the various gameplay systems you're presenting them with that are not exactly movement or viewpoint. And of course, gameplay tools can interact with those. A grapple hook's a good example of a tool that influences player movement. But being aware of these three things and how the player is trying to communicate with your design is key to how you're going to approach level design and enemy design. So, Stardew Valley, yes, in this game, what does the player want to do? Let me know in the chat, or let me know here in our video call. Farm some veggies, get rich. That's right. Manual labor, all good things. Grow crops and chill. Yeah. A lot of things about farming, making money, which is a form of, I'd say, resource acquisition. Get rich by crops. Yeah, so there's a common pattern here. You generally want to be growing crops, extracting resources from those crops you've grown, and foster social relationships. All of these systems that we see on screen here are about that. There is very little to be gained by making this 3D and putting it in a third-person perspective that you do not get for those systems in this really simple top-down view. And like Stardew Valley is a fascinating example of how robust and effective focused design can be. When you think about it, your player in this game doesn't have a lot of gameplay tools available to them. I can move around. I can interact with an environmental item, with the items in the environment. Like I can talk to people, I can open doors, that kind of stuff. And then I've got a rough kind of like, what would it be? These are almost like a utilitarian, it's not quite an attack, but it's like it's a utilitarian environmental interaction of me swinging a sword or harvesting hay or digging hoeing dirt. It's all kind of clumped in the same thing. But within those three very simple systems of just like basic navigation, basic object interaction, and kind of a basic sort of attack/environmental interaction action, you get a huge number of behaviors the player can be doing. I could be watering crops, I could be harvesting things, I can be fighting monsters, I can be fishing. There's so many things you get out of those basic interactions. But by knowing what the player wants to do with those interactions, that's where they get a lot of their gameplay depth. All right, so here's another one. Genshin Impact, same question. So overall, in Genshin Impact, what does the player want to do? Explore. Exploring for gachas. In Genshin Impact, there's a lot of gachas, a lot of exploring. I'm looking for new gachas. Where are the new gachas? That wouldn't work very well in the top-down view of a Stardew Valley because I just can't see enough of the environment. I want to be exploring, engaging what's out there. Third-person perspective is really good for that. I want to see my position relative to the environment. Again, third-person perspective. All of this environmental and level layout that they have here, this open world design, is about facilitating that. This is about allowing me to have nice, wide, clean vistas ahead of me so I can see areas for me to explore, interact with, get my gachas, fight monsters, all that kind of stuff. Right, so one more example. Actually, got two more examples for you. Next example, going with a puzzle game here. So Candy Crush, players clearing tiles. It's in the name. I'm crushing candy here. But there is distinctive level design within this. You can see that within the layout of the puzzle and about how that forces me to rethink how I'm approaching this match 3, match 4 kind of mechanic. It's putting in really the level design puts in specific spatial rules and limitations that directly interact with my ability to reorganize these tiles. All right, now, come on. All right, so here's one of my favorites. Bit of a counterexample. This is from Halo Infinite. In Halo, what does the player want to do? If I'm playing Halo, what am I thinking about? What am I hoping to do? Shoot, kill monsters. Bingo. This is an interesting thing. So absolutely, Halo's about fighting the Covenant with heavy artillery, the assault rifle, the plasma sword, the gravity hammer, all those great weapons that are in Halo. This particular screenshot is from the open world reveal they had for Halo Infinite, where they're saying, all right, this is Halo as an open world. I want you to take a look at this screenshot. Do you notice anything that's missing from it for a game that's about shooting stuff? Yeah. It's a screenshot without any, it's a reveal without anything to shoot in it. Like, picture how great this would have been if you'd had that reveal, same kind of vista, but it got like enemy depots, there's patrols, there's, perhaps a brute on the edge of this little parapet here next to a bunch of exploding barrels. I'm like, oh, as a player, I want to shoot things because it's Halo. Look at all the stuff I have to shoot. Right now, what it's presenting me in its level design is a lot of places to walk, which really isn't what people are showing up to Halo for. I think this is an example of them doing a really good job of setting an environment and showing some really excellent technology, but they missed that overall that conversation about, hey, as a player, I have these gameplay tools. Give me a world, give me levels that allow me to utilize these tools properly. This is one of the things, that we saw was done really well in our previous examples of Stardew Valley, Genshin Impact, and Candy Crush. So let's look at incorporating this into your guys' designs. So, has this ever happened to you? As a player, you're sitting there in cover, you're like, man, I sure want to take out these enemies, or I want to navigate to the next puzzle. And you're looking for ways of doing that. So this is a screenshot from, I believe this is Uncharted 4. This is the work in progress version of the level. This is their gray box. So when you're designing and developing a level, you will do a very simple version of a level called a gray box. Doesn't have textures or a lot of art detail, but this is where you really can examine and work with, as a designer, the gameplay tools I have and how the player will want to be using these tools, and how, as a designer, I'll be facilitating that. So we see here, within the Uncharted games, there's a lot of exploration, there's a lot of combat, there's a lot of traversal. So in this level, I've got a puzzle I've presented the player with. There's a navigation and combat puzzle here. The enemies are just represented by little, lifeless pink stand-ins. But the designers are aware that, okay, they ought to give the player a position to evaluate the puzzle safely. So they have a cover position there for Drake. They've got some navigational puzzles. So I've got a big gap there and a couple of different levels. On top of that, I also have these oppositional elements of these NPCs that I will need to take care of before I can complete that traversal. So there's a really good example in here of, as a player, I want to be able to navigate the level, proceed towards the goal. As a designer, I'm placing in obstacles that help to frustrate the player in that direction and challenge them. I'm presenting them with a puzzle here. And approaching the level through this very simple kind of visual language allows me to focus just on that. Really good level design should be able to exist with a very, very simple visual language. When I'm interviewing designers, I will generally just give them an empty room with about 2 or 3 props in it, and then I'll give them a brief about the kind of combat or experience I want to see within this level. I'll say, all right, I want you to design a level that's all about, hiding from a enemy that cannot see you but can hear you. So make that interesting for the player. And I want the player to have to get to this green marker over here. Here's a cube, a little ladder-shaped thing, and a triangle. I need you to put these together and make a level that embraces that. Because I want them thinking about what does the player want to do, what gameplay tools do they have, and how will the level layout interact with those. All right. So I'll check here in the video chat. Does anyone have any questions? If you don't stop, I'm just going to keep going. Scott.
So when you're building out these levels, are these levels, like during the process, are these done 2D, sketched on paper, or is it more you build it in the environment and then make some tweaks when you can actually see a facsimile of the final output?
Excellent question there. So every designer is going to be a little different with this. With me, I like to start on paper first. Well, actually, it's earlier than that. With me, I like to start with the concept, that emotional, philosophical concept I had you guys all do for your games. That's a really important thing to start with. So I'll know overall, what are we trying to accomplish within this level? We want this level to be all about rapid movement and very quick target acquisition, or we want to have this be about careful exposure to environment, all those kind of things. I'm like, okay, now that I have the idea for what I want this level to be about, I've written down that little concept in like a text document or a scrap of paper or what have you. Then I'll start drawing it out. Behind me, I've got my trusty whiteboard. It has been phenomenal how many hard design problems I've been able to solve just by like being, okay, square, player's going to start here. I need them to get here. You guys actually, I don't know if you guys can actually see this all that well, so I need them to go like this, and then that'll happen. And then, after about 20 minutes or so scribbling, I'll have a good idea of like how this should work. Then I'll take that into a 3D environment, quickly mock it up, see if what made sense here makes sense in the 3D environment. If I get stuck in the 3D environment and I can't see what's working, I'll generally go back to this step. I'll start whiteboarding it again. Just the action of drawing things out and getting away from an editor really helps me. Sometimes I'll just go for a walk or what have you. But you want to get as much figured out in the cheapest, prototyping phase as possible, because I would much rather discover the issues at this step than 2 years down development once you've done motion capture and voice acting and had a team of artists descend onto this stuff. It's almost kind of like being a mathematician. You prove it out in theory first, and then you should have a good idea of the actual, the real world results. But like any good scientist or mathematician, you don't know it actually works until you've actually tested it. So I try to go from here to prototyping very, very quickly. Does that answer your question, Scott?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions?
Wouldn't we also have to speak a bit about the properties of the environment?
Oh.
Yeah. So, for example, not the shape itself, like a cube, a ladder, and a triangle. It doesn't. Not only the shape of it dictates the environment, but the properties. Like, for example, you can climb the ladder, but you may not be able to climb the cube.
Yes, exactly. And this is also one of the things I want to, when I'm interviewing designers, something I'm looking for is like, well, you can scale that cube, you can rotate it, you can move it. There's a lot of things you can do with that cube. It's not just a cube. But yes, those properties that the player can interact with within a level are also really important. Like, are they going through across a field? Are they wading through water? Are they going through lava? Like, all of these things will only be of interest to the player if they're actually impacting them on a gameplay level. If I'm going through a field and then through water and my movement properties are exactly the same, I really don't notice the water as a player. Or even if the water is slowing me down and I'm just going from point A to point B, I kind of notice I'm going slower, but I don't really care. Now, where I do care about that water is, let's say I'm going across a field in Genshin Impact, I'm going across some water, and there are enemies that have electrical attacks, and if they hit the water, that entire water then becomes a hazard area. That water is now of extreme interest to me as a player, because I'm like, oh, I got to get from point A to point B, but I got to either figure out how to get over this water, or I got to get through the water really quickly. It's like, oh, there's too many of those enemies. I can't get through this water quickly enough without taking damage. Do I have anything in my inventory that'll help me? All of a sudden, they start engaging with all these gameplay systems and actively problem solving, because the placement of just something as simple as water has been given an actual gameplay context. That's the important thing in your level design. All these things need to have a gameplay context. All right, Angelos, does that answer your question? Good? All right. Okay. Anything else? Or shall we move ahead? I think we're going to charge
Got a
forward.
couple questions from chat regarding this.
Yep.
What are the best ways to guide the player besides tall buildings that are visible from afar and light?
Okay. All right. I'm going to take one of these questions. I want you to take some of the other ones. Put them in your pocket. We're going to get to them in just a bit. All right. So best way of guiding players, tall buildings and light. Honestly, those two things are so effective. I'm just like, just have a pillar of light. It's generally fine. Now, effectively, what you want to have is you want to have it that as a player, I imagine you're talking about an open world environment here. Want to have it as I'm looking across the open world, I could be, oh, there's something that's interesting. So it's got to stand out from the environment. If I've got like lush, organic, open space, I want to put something hard, mechanical, and rigid that just stands out like a sore thumb and has like blinking lights on it or something. You're like, that doesn't belong. I'll bet there's something interesting over there. One of my favorite examples of this was in the design of Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64, Shigeru Miyamoto. This was one of the first open world 3D games, and that was a problem they had. Okay, how do you guide the player? And throughout the opening of the game, they're constantly telling the player, okay, you have to meet up with Princess Zelda. You have to meet up with Princess Zelda. They repeat it several times. Then when they release them to the open world, they tell them again, don't forget, you got to go find Princess Zelda. And on the far end of the open world, the player can see a castle. And they're like, all right, now the player knows where they need to go. They technically can go anywhere, but they know they're looking for a princess. Princess is in a castle. There's a castle at the far end of the world. Let me try getting over there. All right, carrying on. So one more thing about level design. I want to make sure you guys are aware of this, because this is one of the most common mistakes that I see with junior designers. I will even see this with senior designers still. It's very frustrating. It is when you're doing anything in a level. If you're trying to introduce a new concept, you want to do something that's called lock, then key. Where this comes from, if I've got a locked door and I give the player the key to the door before they see the door, I don't have a locked door. I've just got a door. I've got a door with an additional step there the player probably wasn't even aware of, because they just picked up the key, didn't know what context it was in. They then see a door that just opens. Locked doors will only work if you show them to the player before they have the key. They've got to be in the environment, see this door, go, that door looks really exciting. How am I going to get through that? It's got a lock. I don't know how to open the lock. Then they find the key later on. They go, wait a minute. There's that locked door that this thing probably opens. Let me go back and try that out. And you get all this wonderful additional gameplay just from a very simple ordering of concepts. Now, this also works with gameplay concepts. It is, if I'm to give the player, let's say I am in Stardew Valley, and I'm not a huge Stardew Valley expert, so this will be a bit of an abstraction, but if I want to make the concept of watering my crops and the system of automating watering the crops more impactful. At first, I need to have the player manually watering the crops. I need to make that kind of a pain in the ass. So they're sitting there going, it's almost like one of those old infomercials. Surely there must be a better way, as they're going around just manually watering everything. And then you're like, well, wait a minute. If you, get this many crops, you can then make an automatic watering system. If I get in that automatic watering system from the start, there's a huge hole in your overall gameplay kind of cycle there. And this is the mistake I commonly see with a lot of designers, is they'll be so interested in that new gameplay concept, they will present it to the player first before they show them the problem that concept has to solve. If I'm giving the player a grappling hook, first I got to show them a lot of stuff that they're like, I don't know how to get up there. Clearly that's too tall. Then you give them the grappling hook. They're like, aha, I get it now. I'm going to go back and explore, and they're having a fun time, and there you go. So this also works for weapons in a first-person shooter and a lot of other systems. Scott.
Yeah, and I imagine this also allows more replayability too. I think Lego games did that, where there were places you couldn't get to in the main storyline, but you go back and you unlock a shorter character or a character with a jetpack, and now you can go back and replay those. So that allows for
exactly. Yep, you got it, Scott. This is the friggin' Metroidvania genre in a nutshell. It is just constantly lock, and then here's one key. Now here's another key, and here's another key. And maybe it's a double jump or a power slide or explosive missiles or, all that kind of stuff. All right. There we go. All right. I want to move over to talking about enemy design. Oh, Eugene, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I did like to ask about the key. In survival horror genre, it's common for a player to find a key and think, what the fuck? What is for? And then find problems and solution. Can be considered a level planning error or not?
That's an interesting one, actually. You bring up a really good point there, Eugene. So what Eugene's saying is that in a lot of horror games, there is a design approach of you give the player the key first, and then they have to go and find an application for it. And actually, Eugene, you raised an excellent point. This was something that honestly hadn't occurred to me, but I'm so glad you brought it up. So there's an important thing they're doing here, and this is a great subversion of this kind of structure. Horror games are all about making that environment super scary and having a very, very vulnerable player. So what a lot of players will do is they'll want to hide back and be very, very careful about how they're approaching these environments. But if you give them a key and they're like, man, I'm really low on ammo, this key looks like it opens something valuable. It now encourages them to go out into the environment. So that's one of the things you can do in a horror game, is that, I guess, let me think about this, because this is actually a really excellent point, is that you can use this as a type of the lock key structure. You can invert that to motivate the player into the environment. This doesn't work in a game where the environment is a relatively safe space. So in a Legend of Zelda game, a key then lock doesn't work. But you're right, in a horror game, it is actually a very useful tool. Thank you very much for bringing that up, Eugene. All right. So we're gonna. Scott.
And I suppose another way to add to that horror aesthetic is perhaps having keys that don't actually unlock anything.
That could be frustrating for a player.
Yeah.
Then you're breaking a contract in gameplay. Like if I'm giving the player a tool, you have to reward the player for the skillful application of that tool. Or you can just, I guess, label it clearly as being useless. Because as a player, if I've got a key and it just doesn't do anything, I'll be like, well, I just wasted a lot of time. Now I'm looking at everything suspiciously.
Right.
So there's possibly an interesting approach there, but I'd be very careful about violating that kind of designer-player contract.
Right. Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Good question, though. All right, let's dive into enemies. So, it's kind of, it should be, I guess I imagine it appears clear that what the difference between levels and enemies are, but I want to clarify that a little bit before we jump into this. So think of levels as being passive elements that the players have to actively engage in. So like, for example, in that horror game, I get that key. That has encouraged me to actively engage in the level because the level is so hostile, I as a player will become overly passive. Levels require active engagement by the player, so I'm voluntarily kind of casting myself into the world to explore the space and interact with its gameplay systems. Enemies, or I think better described as just oppositional agents, because you can get some elements that act very similar to enemies without being actual enemies, are active elements that players must react to. I can't sit here and be passive because there's agents out there in the world that are actively working to undo my progress or cost me resources or what have you. Just kind of do bad stuff. So that's a really good way of thinking about these things. So for levels, I like to think, what does the player want to do? I want to go exploring. I want to go and collect resources. I want to reach this overall goal. And then I'm structuring things that they will actively engage in to make that process interesting. For enemies, because enemies are actively pursuing the player, I'm now thinking, what can the player do? What are my abilities? Jumping, slashing, dodging, all that kind of stuff. And how can I have the enemies work within those abilities? So think of like an enemy, like I said, as being an oppositional NPC, as being a unique gameplay challenge for the player. So we got the Goomba here from Super Mario Brothers. It just basically moves left and right, and it's a very basic navigational and jumping challenge. And that really is all it is. The Goomba makes sense in the world of Mario because Mario can move and jump. If Mario had a gun, the Goomba stops being an interesting enemy. And also a good enemy design, it's going to be a clear test of a gameplay system. So you'll see in Mario games that a lot of the games are basically about how Mario positions himself and how they overall use that jump. Some enemies cannot be jumped on. Some enemies have to be dodged. Some enemies have to be jumped on multiple times. Some enemies change their state when you do jump on them. And all these things, all this enemy design works because those are the gameplay verbs or gameplay language that the player has. Another thing is a good enemy design will generally subvert gameplay systems. So like, you think if I'm in like a first-person shooter like Halo, if I've got like my sticky plasma grenade, what if there's an enemy that has a shield that just directly reflects the grenade back at me? Something that was a really set, really solid rule before, my go-to, suddenly the enemy has undone that, and now the plasma grenades have become something very dangerous. But actually, within that system, you could also use like a great little ricochet mechanic. You'd have all sorts of fun with that because the enemy design has subverted it. Of course, not every enemy can be subverting things all the time. That would get tedious, but very careful applications can lead to some really exciting enemy design. All right, carrying on. So, asking, what can the player do? So these are the enemies from Doom. This is, I think, one of the most well-regarded rogues galleries in a game. In Doom, I can move and I can shoot. I can also operate doors and switches, but that's very much a secondary action. The player cannot jump, they cannot roll, they cannot dodge. It's just a first-person game. I am moving and I am shooting. All the enemy designs are entirely about interacting with those systems. And this is really interesting. They've gotten such an iconic and effective rogues gallery here just by varying these guys on two different axes. And I think they got two different, so they got movement and attacks. And they've got 2 different types of movement. It can either be flying or walking. And they have 4 different classifications of attack. It can be a hit scan attack. It can be a projectile, or I guess it'd be like what do you refer to as? You have 2 different projectiles. You have a kind of a very standard projectile, like a fireball, and you have explosive projectiles, and then you also have a melee. So you have a hit scan, low lethality projectile, high lethality projectile, and a melee attack. Yes, in the chat, yes, the invisible pinky is missing, as is the zombie soldier. Unfortunately, this was the lineup graphic I have. It still illustrates the concept. But to quickly kind of go through these enemies and how they get such variation from those kind of, I guess, limited gameplay axes. On the bottom left, we've got 2 soldiers there, both of which have hit scan weapons, one which has a shotgun, which does hit scan across a kind of scattered area. You also have a guy with a chain gun, rapid fire hit scan. Above them, you have the Cacodemon, flying monster that shoots fireballs, which is a type of projectile. Next to them, you got a Baron of Hell, walking enemy, shoots fireballs that are very similar to those of the Cacodemon. Next to the Baron of Hell, another walking demon, walking enemy, the Cyber Demon, fires missiles at you. That's an explosive projectile. Next to the Cyber Demon, we have the Flying Lost Souls, which is a flying melee enemy. Below the Lost Soul, we've got the Demon, which is a walking melee enemy. So we have a flying melee, walking melee. Then on the right-hand side, we have the Imp, which is a kind of low-threat projectile enemy. The Imp is effectively the Baron of Hell monster. That's the peak centaur monster there. That just has less hit points. It's smaller, less hit points, does less damage. But just by exploring those 2 gameplay axes, they've gotten this really robust, really wide-ranging group of enemies that just, it becomes very replayable and very distinctive. So that's the thing. When you're introducing a new enemy, like what's going to make it different for the player is if you're challenging the player in a different way and by directly engaging with those gameplay systems that the player is using or their gameplay vocabulary. All right. So looking at this from another perspective for oppositional, oppositional agents, this is from City Skylines. So in City Skylines, as a player, I am in charge of building and developing a city. So my goal here is largely to be trying to drive up my overall population numbers. There's some other sub-objectives there as well. But the main thing I'm focusing on is making a large, successful city. And a lot of that is driven by the population of that city. But behind those numbers are so many other systems and subsystems regarding population movement, crime, electricity, waste management. On this screenshot here, we've got the population window, and it's got a birth rate, a death rate, when people have moved in or moved away, and also age distribution. All of these different numbers. And the thing is, all of these are important to me as a player because all of these factor into my population growth. As I'm pursuing that population growth, these are some actually of the bits of data that are trying to overall kind of like frustrate or challenge that, and they're presenting me with those design puzzles. That also happens in the environment from level design here as well, about the amount, how I use the overall space of the map, about driving forward that the city population. Right. Does anyone have any questions about enemies or oppositional agents? Going once, going twice. All right. Oh, Scott.
So in a game that doesn't have, humanoid enemies or monsters, like a Candy Crush game where there might be obstacles or something, those would be considered enemies, right? Like things that, like a blocker that will prevent you from moving things, right? Or in a Tetris game, like a level or some blocks that you just can't. You have to navigate around.
Yeah, this is actually an interesting point because that, like, as much as we want to create really clean categories for these things, there is a lot of overlap. So they're kind of enemies. They're also kind of elements of the level design. it's like putting a flamethrower trap in like a first-person level. It's like, well, it's kind of environment, it's kind of enemy, it's sort of on a bit of a middle ground here. But generally with those, like, I'd say if it's something that I can passively react to, like perhaps a tile in Candy Crush that requires I break all the surrounding tiles around it, I consider that part of the level design. If it's something that's more active, like a tile that will explode and spread out blocking tiles within a set number of moves, I consider that more of an enemy design. But the barriers and boundaries between the two is a little hazy.
Right.
All right.
Okay, thanks.
Sweet. No problem. All right. So from here, El Nivelador, do you have some questions for me?
I do.
Excellent.
So
What
I'll
do
go
we
with
got?
most recent questions asked in chat. Do you think that a game, maybe a chill one, could possibly risk becoming too boring without enemies?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's, well, actually, let me walk that back a little bit. If you look at like hidden object games, those are really all about environment. So like in hidden object games, I'm just looking for elements within a picture, and those are a very chill game. And that's a very passive level design kind of way of challenging the player. But I still, at the same time, I think if you want to add in a bit more spice, putting in some more active elements into that design would probably help to make it a lot more compelling. But again, you've got to go back to those the emotional and philosophical goals that you set for yourself within your design, and making sure that you're respecting and furthering those. And also, I want to be clear, all designs have an effective lifespan. At a certain point, if there's only an hour to your game, that's fine. Just be aware, okay, the game's only an hour long. There are some great games, some real classics. They only have about 15 minutes of actual unique content in them. They just, jack up the challenge or give you high score chases, all that kind of stuff, All right. Next question, please.
How would you apply what we've been talking about to casino games or idle type of games?
Oh, that's a good question. Casino games, it's a very broad kind of term. So if I was looking exclusively at like a card game, perhaps something like Solitaire, then that is largely kind of passive kind of level design. The level design within that would be kind of the ways that you can lay out the cards and their positioning to each other and how the cards can move around the overall kind of play field, or kind of your level design elements there. But you can also have very active oppositional gameplay elements as well. You can have casino games with, of course, opposing players. You can have a dealer that can be an oppositional element. You can have timed elements that work as an oppositional element. I think horse racing would be a good example of that, where the other racers on the field are opposing my goals as a player, even though I'm taking a very passive kind of approach here to do like some kind of horse racing gambling kind of game. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, next one.
But Ivan Franco asks, how do you feel about Halo using Unreal 5 from now on?
I think that's fine. What I saw in the video that discussed the engine change is a lot of comments were asking, okay, but what's the actual gameplay going to be like? And I think that's a really important question for them to be aware of. Like that's the thing that's interesting. Like Halo's had good technology, but some of their best games haven't had the best technology, but they did have very good gameplay. That's the thing as well. Like, for like Bungie's follow-up game Destiny, excellent shooting gameplay there. Like their time to kill and their overall like power progression with the weapons is chef's kiss. And that's the important thing. It was like, I think they've gotten some really good production benefits from switching game engines, but they got to remember, people are showing up for gameplay.
the end of the day, that's what counts.
Absolutely.
How should you approach level design if you yourself don't have much interest in level design?
Oh, that's a tough one. So I would say as a designer, your interest is in the player experience. And even if it's just like not your particular cup of tea, you've got to be able to at least kind of get the job done there. So, I mean, with that, if I was working on a project that required a lot of level design and there were multiple designers on that project, and I wasn't interested in level design. Oh, like honestly, personally, I would just try to find something in level design that interested me. But there are always options of like trying to find a better design alignment within the team. Or if I'm working on this project, I would have to ask, like, if I was directing or overseeing this project, I would be asking, why am I designing a project that I myself do not have a level of interest in that I'm able to get engaged with to create a good project. So I would say either first thing is just find out what you can love about level design and dig into that. There's always interesting things to be done. There's a really good book called Flow, it's Flow, the Psychology of Optimum Experience, and it's about effective ways that you can find to really engage in pretty much any task, even if the task isn't immediately gratifying. This is an important thing as being a professional. A lot of times you got to do work that isn't your first pick, but you still have to get it done. So first thing is I would just find something I love about level design, lean into that. Second thing, if that's really not working, and I'd be concerned if it wasn't, but if it's not, I would look at perhaps moving to a different position on the design team. Or thirdly, I would look at adjusting the overall design of the game so that it was a design I was more equipped to better provide for. All right. One
Next
more question.
question.
Yep.
Does a level designer get involved in the art side of 3D models and textures?
I'd say no. Level design, it's best thought of purely within that kind of gray boxing space like we saw earlier with Uncharted. I do like to talk with artists while I am doing level design to make sure that I'm designing a level that will work with them when they are doing their art pass. If it's too weird and too abstract, the artist could just come back and say, "Look, I've got no idea how to make this an actual physical space so the players can understand what's going on here. We gotta have some back and forth with this, But that's a really good process. I'll do a level, like I'll whiteboard it, I'll gray box it. I'll be like, all right, feels great. I'll pull some artists in. I'm like, okay, I'm liking this, but what do you guys think? And they're like, well, it doesn't really make sense. Why would there be a cliff there? This kind of thing. That's not really how waterfalls work. This layout just doesn't look like a desert when this is supposed to be a desert. I'm like, okay, point taken. Back to the whiteboard. Let me redo it. Send them a copy of the whiteboard illustration. I'm like, well, what about this overall approach? They'll yay or nay it. We'll have it back and forth. I'll gray box it, send that to them again. Say, okay, what about now? But I would not, as a designer, be trying to think about how the art for the level should work. You've got professionals on your team that are handling that. Let them handle that. You just focus on those gameplay problems. All right, we are gonna move on. We'll have room for more questions at the end of the class. But moving on, I want to move over to homework. So we've just gone over level design and enemy design. So we've got some really fun homework for everyone. So first homework assignment, I want you to take the game design worksheet that you were working in your previous class, start a new column for this class, and I want you to copy over all of your features. You're going to move them over, and you're going to add in new features that detail how your levels are going to work and how your enemies are going to work, given what we discussed here. Even if your game doesn't have perhaps specific levels or enemies, try to think about how you can integrate that kind of overall thinking in design. So like I said, if you're doing a casino game, Think about the layout of cards on a table and how those will interact with each other as being your level design. If you're doing a, like I said, hidden object game without a lot of active NPC agents, then try to be thinking about, is there a way you can add in some more active gameplay elements to really challenge the player? And there's second part. I want us to take a moment and introduce ourselves to, we've got a brand new student. We got a new class member. This is Wendy Woodchipper. And what we're going to do is we're going to feed Wendy Woodchipper. I want you to feed Wendy Woodchipper 20% of your features. All those features you worked on last week that you loved, you sweated over, you're like, yes, that's it. I need to take about 1/5 of those, throw those into Wendy, and she'll generate a kind of like design slurry of all your hopes and dreams. That's the second part of our homework for today. I need to take your design and simplify it by 1/5. The new classmate seems like a bit of a teacher's pet. You know what? You're not wrong. You're not wrong. Me and Wendy, we get along like that. All right. Remember, the thing is, a big part about being a designer is being humble and don't overly attach yourself to your designs. So I want you thinking about, okay, I got to take 1/5 of my design and simplify it down. All right. Yes, you are going Fargo on your game. Absolutely. All right. That's it. Do we have any other questions?
We do.
Fantastic.
Going from the top of my list, we got, do you agree with the phase, which I know you do? If you make something for everyone, you're making it for no one.
Absolutely. Like, it's just, I'm working on like a project pitch right now, and part of the pitch, as I said, this pitch is, it's part sales, it's part sales pitch, it's also part filter. I want this to be very clear about who this isn't for, because I don't want to get people onto the, publishers or resources or financiers and they don't get it, or this isn't for them. It's like, look, we're going to find out exactly who this is for, and those are the only people we want to be talking to. You can broaden things out later, but being really clear about who you're making this for is very important. And of course, you're not making it for yourself. How many copies do you want to sell? 2, 1 to yourself and another one to your mother, But be clear about who you're making it for, and then then have a plan for how you're going to broaden that out as you develop the product.
Next question. Is it better to figure out gameplay sequences in the text first and then start designing levels? This is referring to single player levels.
No. I leave gameplay sequences very late. That was something I would do early on, is I'd be like, oh, the player will do this, then they'll do this, then they'll do this. I find it's much better now is you set those high-level emotional philosophical goals. I'm looking at the level, and I will just start playing around and like doing on the whiteboard, doing it in the editor. I don't try to answer those questions until the last possible minute at this time. Like oftentimes people ask, what do you have in mind for the level? I'm like, man, it's something about hiding and targeting. I'll figure it out when I get in the editor. And the thing is that when you've got a clear idea of what you want to do, subconsciously you're always thinking about it. So when you get to the editor, you're like, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to do this. And then, I was thinking that might be an interesting idea. But if you're trying to solve everything before you've actually gotten into developing the gameplay, there's so many unknowns when you're just doing it in the paper prototype phase. Trying to solve all those questions there, it's a fool's errand. All right,
Perfect.
Next one.
How do you manage player frustrations around moving in loops and backtracking in general?
Oh, rigorous playtesting. That's the playtesting. That's what it's for. I'm just constantly playtesting stuff. You'll also, as you develop as a designer, you'll sort of get a gut reaction to this stuff, but the gold standard is a good playtest.
Perfect. Can we include drawings, visuals in our documents to better illustrate our ideas?
For the gameplay workbook, I want you to keep it just as text right now. I want you to be able to communicate these ideas via text.
Perfect.
As you work as a professional, you can incorporate illustrations, but for the purpose of this course, we are just focusing on text communication right now.
Next question. A game based on relax and exploration without any kind of stress or pressure can stand without any kind of enemies? I think something like Girls or A Short Hike.
Yeah, there is. This is an interesting one because there is like the walking simulator style of game, or just like really kind of almost aggressively cozy games. I think within that you still want to have some element of like implied narrative tension. If you're like, people enjoy playing games because they're engaged. They're going through a process of emotional arousal of getting like, oh man, I can't wait to see what happens next. And you want to have a sense of dramatic tension with that. Now, it doesn't have to be an active system, but I would worry about making a game that is too passive or overly cozy. So let me try to think. Like, it's like when you think about something that's like cozy, like, example I always like to leave it like My Neighbor Totoro. It's about some young girls, and they're hanging out with like this furry, big, cuddly troll that lives in their backyard. But like towards the end, it's like, the little, spoiler alert, but like the little sister runs away, and there's a long time where the older sister like doesn't know if she died or not. She's like, it may be very well be that I'm at this point, I am looking for my sister's body. And it's like, for a film that was so cozy, holy crap, did that get dark. And that's why it's so effective. They could have made it just about them hanging out with Totoro, and then, they go home, have lunch, and just continue living their day. But like, you got to bring in those dramatic stakes eventually.
Exactly.
Right.
Next question. What about games where there is no objectives, like recently launched Tiny Glade or Townscaper? There are no enemies, there are no abilities to unlock, and even the puzzle mechanic is very abstract.
Oh, Tiny Glade. That one, there are objectives. They're just very nuanced in how they're stated. The objective is like, be creative and build a castle. Now, this is the thing. Tiny Glade is much closer to a toy than a game. Games work best with set objectives. Toys are more about kind of like objectives that you set yourself. It is, I've got a big box of Legos. I'm going to make a rocket ship. I've got like my Barbie dolls. I'm going to or was it be enact going to the mall or something like that. That's drifting more into the realm of toy, which can be useful. And of course, again, these categories are fuzzier than we generally think they are. But I'd say just be aware that if you're making something that is more toy-like, you're going to make something like Tiny Glade. Games generally work better with clear objectives, rules, structures, and limitations.
Perfect. And next question. What about enemies in Souls-like games where the bosses feel unfair to play against? What could be some good ways to make them more approachable and not ruin the fun when player dies time after time?
Make controls really snappy and make telegraphing really clear. Like, challenge is good as long as the players feel like they're like the fuck up was on them. If they feel like the game's being unfair or it's not responding to input, or this is freaking impossible, then they'll disengage and just check out. Like, one of my favorite gaming memories was I was playing F-Zero GX, and there's a story campaign. So F-Zero GX is like a sci-fi hovercraft Zero G kind of racing game. And there's one mission where they give you like about 15 seconds or so to escape from an exploding reactor, and you've got to like navigate all these, like, you're just going in a straight line, dodging all these pillars and closing doors, and there's a big explosion behind you. It's really exciting. And I probably played those 15 seconds of gameplay for about an hour and a half. Of just like, start the race, get 5 seconds in, I hit a wall, and I'm like, fuck. Start again, hit the other wall. Fuck. Start again, I forgot the the gate closing pattern was vertical, vertical, horizontal, horizontal, vertical. I thought it was vertical, horizontal, vertical, so I put my craft in the wrong position. All the time, I just keep dying every, 1 to 5 seconds. I'm just like, oh, Matt, you forgot that. You weren't responding fast enough. That was great. Like I said, 15 seconds, and I was playing it for an hour and a half. Got to the end, spiked the controller as like a victory. Felt great. Going to the next mission, and that's always stayed with me. So for the Dark Souls enemies, for like player side, make sure that the controls are really responsive. Enemy side, make sure that their telegraphing is really clear. Clarity with this kind of stuff is so important. It should be very clear to the player that, oh, they're going for an overhead slash now, or they're doing like a stomp, or right now they're dazed. If it's it's like in those Dark Souls games, the Souls-like games, they make the weapon hit sound so clear because it's so important, because they're trying to make it really clear what's actually happening during gameplay. All right, next question.
Is it worth thinking about potential secondary audiences?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I would treat them just like that. They are a secondary audience. They're important, but you've got to know who your primary audience is. It's like, I am right-handed. I still want to have a left hand, but I am right-handed. All right, I got a question here from Scott.
Yeah, so I noticed there's a few games, Harry Potter Hogwarts Legacy comes to mind, where there's a wide variety of play styles that you can do, right? So, you can go in and use stealth to take out enemies. You can go in, spells blazing. There's a Pokemon pet capture element. There's a nesting component, right? So it seems that they're trying to appeal to a variety of players who enjoy different aspects of gameplay. There's relationship building, for example. You can or cannot, or you may choose not to do those, right? In terms of appealing to a broader audience, do you think they've deliberately added that type of mechanic or that range of mechanic into the game to appeal to a larger?
That's a really good question. So there's two ways that approach to design can be. So I don't refer to as like maximalist design. We're going to try to add in as much as we can to the experience to drive value forward. So within that, what you can be doing is you can be trying to find different ways of using that core gameplay rule set in really interesting ways and really dynamic and original ways. That's one of the things that Stardew Valley does a wonderful job of. But you can also do an approach of like, we will actually make 15 kind of middling games and try to stitch them all together and just hope that the aggregate value of all these things is what players are going to be focusing on. And I find oftentimes that can be like, what you'll do is you'll get players will be like, oh, I can do a dating mini game, but like it's not that interesting, so I just do it for a little bit, then I just go back to the core gameplay, which is actually what I want to be doing. And all the time, that's pulling resources from your core gameplay loop. So I think if you are adding those things posthumous ad hoc, you are diluting and distracting from your core gameplay. Like it's Minecraft. There's so many things you can do with Minecraft, but it all comes from that really solid, really robust core rule set. And like I worked on Grand Theft Auto 5, and that was like that's Rockstars are the kings of maximalist gameplay, and they can really hit it. But within a lot of those projects, there's a lot of stuff that I will bet most of the features in a lot of large Rockstar games are not heavily engaged with by the audience. And remember, all those are competing for the same resources. If I'm moving them over here, I'm taking them away from here. So there's a very careful balance there. You don't want this to be entirely on rails or overly directed, but you've got to be careful about that balance. So I guess to summarize, I would be looking for gameplay variety by finding innovation within that core gameplay rule set if I was starting to do that maximalist approach of like trying to create several other little mini games to support my core game, I would be very careful about how I approach that. And I would still try to reference the core gameplay rules as much as possible. If it feels like something totally different, then it will be a weak addition to the game, most likely. All right.
So maybe in the context of Harry Potter, all those different parts are they're still using the quest quest mechanic, right? But they're optional quests, right?
Yeah,
So maybe
yeah.
that's hey, I got to collect these nails of Feasels or whatever, right? But it's a quest you don't have to take at the expense of your main quest line.
Yeah, that's it. If all of a sudden it forced me into a dating minigame, players would probably they would likely be frustrated unless that was done very, very carefully and very, very well.
Yeah, but they could just skip that quest entirely if they weren't interested.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I say we go for 2 more questions.
Okay. Is the Paladin program still available to apply?
Yes, the Paladin program is still available to apply. There should be in the student resources document, there should be a link for applying to become a Paladin.
And that is all pinned in the top for Twitch.
Yes, it is.
My last question. Since you worked in Max Payne 3 level designs, can you describe the most challenging level that you've worked on in the game, especially your process? How did you approach from concept?
Oh man, yeah. So this was so this was one of my favorite level designs I did, and it actually didn't make it into the game. So this was in Max Payne 3. I was in charge of the nightclub level. So it was a second level in the game, and it was kind of this big opening to gameplay, these big set pieces, and it starts off with Max in a very intense gunfight on a dance floor. So here, let me draw something. Let me just adjust my lighting here. You can see it a little better. Okay, so this is the thing. So I'll just do this very roughly. So so in Max Payne, as I throw my markers around, the player can move, they can shoot, they can take cover, and they can shoot dive. So I'm like, all right, those are my 4 mechanics I want to focus on. And I want this to be, we're in a nightclub. I want it to feel intense, crazy, and like there's just constantly chaos around the player. So how do I get that to happen? So what I made was an arena. Let me see. So it was shaped vaguely like this. There was an enemy entrance here. Can you guys see this? A minute. Mouse cursor going. Okay, tell you what, I'm gonna stop presenting. No, I want to be. Oh, all right. I go back to presenting, I'm afraid. All right, so this is unfortunately it's not really showing. Okay, so anyways, I will describe it. We had a 4-sided room. 3 sides of the room enemies could come from. Each one of these entrances for each side of the room had a strong cover position for covering that entrance. So I can really have the north side of the nightclub covered, and anything coming from the north, I'm just mowing it down. But if I'm there, I can be flanked from the east or the west. So I go to the north side of the club. I'm mowing down those enemies. All of a sudden, I'm getting flanked from the east. Oh shit, I'm vulnerable. So I got to shoot dodge out of the way, run across the dance floor, get into cover. So I'm now covering for the enemies that are coming at me from the east. Now I'm getting flanked from behind me from the west. Oh shit. Jump back out into the dance floor, doing the shoot dodge. So now I'm exposed, run across the dance floor again, get into another cover position. And we just kept things going back and forth like that. It was a really simple design, but it got that feeling of just constant panic and chaos on the dance floor. It felt really, really good. Ultimately, reason why we didn't go with that design was they wanted this level to be about forward momentum. and about the player chasing after, forget the character's name. One of the characters have been kidnapped, and you're chasing after her. So they're like, we didn't want to have any part of the level have the player being too stationary for too long. So it was decided, no, it just didn't go with the overall goals of the game. So everyone loved the fight, but they're like, it just doesn't match what we want for this level overall. So it got scrapped, redid it, made it a lot more linear. We kept some of those elements within that core dance floor fight. I'm still really happy with how it worked out. But that was one of my favorite stories about level design on Max Payne 3. Okay, I think that's it for today. Thank you very much, everyone. You ever see the mask is his real face? Of course. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. This was great.
Thanks,
Thank
Matthew.
you for coming.
No worries.